Everyone knows the legend. Two twins abandoned at birth. A she-wolf, her fangs sharp but her heart strangely gentle. The boy she saved, Romulus and Remus, would grow up to carve a city from the hills of the Tiber, and one would kill the other to become the first king of Rome. It's the story every Roman child once heard before bedtime. But what if it wasn't the full story? What if the myth of Romulus and Remus was only a mask? A public tale told to hide something far older, far stranger, and far more secret. Historians have long believed that the Roman legend was built upon fragments of older traditions. The she-wolf may not have been an animal at all, but a priestess. The twins may not have been brothers, but symbolic founders. Two opposing forces that represented unity and division, life and death, creation and destruction. And the foundation of Rome in 753 before Christ? That may not have been a beginning, but a continuation of something already ancient. Before there was Rome, there were the Etruscans, a mysterious people who ruled the lands north of the Tiber River long before the Latin tribes ever dreamed of empire. They built cities with complex walls, temples aligned to the stars, and networks of sacred tunnels. They were astronomers, engineers, and priests, and they believed that the destiny of a city was written not in its soil, but in the sky. The Etruscans practiced something called the Disciplina Etrusca, a secret science of divine law. It taught that the gods had revealed to them a set of sacred rules for founding cities, reading lightning, and interpreting omens. Every Roman ritual, from the blessing of armies to the design of temples, can be traced back to these ancient masters of divination. Even the most famous Roman custom, drawing a line with a plow to mark the city's walls, was an Etruscan ceremony. So here's a question that should make us pause. Was Romulus truly the founder of Rome, or merely the heir of a hidden brotherhood that existed centuries before him? Some ancient authors hinted at the existence of a secret league known as the 12 Kings of the Hills. They were said to have ruled the land around the Tiber in a confederation. 12 clans, 12 temples, 12 sacred fires. When their alliance fell into chaos, the myth of two brothers was born, a poetic way to explain the civil war that ended their reign. In this interpretation, Romulus and Remus were never real men at all. They were symbols, the last echo of a forgotten age, when power was sacred and knowledge was hidden behind ritual and blood. And so, before we can truly understand how Rome began, we must look beyond the wolf, beyond the twins, beyond the story carved in marble, because the real founders of Rome were never meant to be remembered. Long before Romulus and Remus were said to have drawn the first walls of Rome, the land along the Tiber River was already alive, not with marble palaces or marching legions, but with whispers, fires, and the quiet songs of ancient tribes. To most historians, this was simply a cluster of primitive villages, but to those who look deeper, it was something far more mysterious. Archaeological digs have revealed that centuries before the legendary founding in 753 before Christ, there were sacred settlements on the Palatine, the Aventine, and the Capitoline Hills. And these weren't random clusters of huts. They were arranged in patterns, geometric, deliberate, almost celestial. Their alignment followed the movement of the stars, especially the constellation of Gemini, the twins. Coincidence, maybe? Or maybe the myth of Romulus and Remus was born from an astronomical code left behind by people who worshipped the heavens long before Rome had a name. These early settlers were not Latins alone. They were a fusion of cultures, Latins, Sabines, and Etruscans, united by trade, war, and something even stronger, belief. Each tribe carried a fragment of a much older truth, a memory of divine founders who had descended from the sky to teach mankind order and law. To them, the gods were not distant beings. They were architects, builders who mapped the cosmos and demanded that mortals mirror that perfection on earth. And so, when they built their villages, they followed what they called the paths of the gods. This ancient belief would later become the foundation of Roman religion itself. The priests of Rome, the augurs and the pontiffs, didn't invent their rituals. They inherited them from the Etruscans, who had already mastered the art of reading signs from nature. Every flash of lightning, every flight of a bird, every drop of rain carried meaning. It was said that the gods were constantly speaking. The wise simply knew how to listen. And hidden beneath all of this was a legend even older than the twins. According to an obscure Etruscan chronicle, fragments of which survive only in later Roman writings, there was once a sacred city beneath the earth, a place where the first kings learned the laws of heaven. It was called Velsna, the womb of fire. The story says that from this underground sanctuary, 12 sages emerged, each bearing a torch. Each one founded a hill city around the Tiber. When their descendants fought and their alliance was broken, the gods erased their names, and history began again, rewritten as myth. Perhaps Romulus and Remus were not the first to spill blood on that sacred soil. Perhaps they were simply the last to claim it. And as Rome grew from those ashes, the memory of the first founders was buried deeper, hidden beneath temples, beneath stone, beneath time itself. Yet their influence never vanished. Their symbols, the wolf, the twins, the plow, the fire, would live on in every Roman banner, every ceremony, every dream of empire. Because Rome was not born in a day, it was resurrected. If Rome was not founded by two brothers, then who protected the spark that gave birth to her power? Ancient whispers speak of a hidden order, a brotherhood older than kings, older even than the Latin tongue itself. They were called the Keepers of the Fire, and they claimed to guard the original flame of the gods, the light that first descended upon the earth when heaven and humanity made their pact. This fire was not mere symbolism. According to legend, it burned in a sacred pit beneath the Palatine Hill, long before any temple was built above it. It was said that whoever controlled this flame could read the will of the gods and reshape destiny itself. When the Etruscans ruled the lands, their priests, the haruspices, used it to see visions. They believed the flame could reveal which cities were destined to rise and which were doomed to fall. Over time, this brotherhood split into two branches. One guarded the fire openly, as the Vestals, the virgin priestesses of Vesta, who kept the eternal flame alive in the heart of Rome. The other vanished from the public eye, operating in the shadows, hidden in the corridors of power. They became the unseen hands behind kings and consuls, influencing fate through ritual and secrecy. The Romans called them the Flamens of the Lost Fire, though even that name survives only in fragments of ancient text. It was from their teachings, some say, that the myth of Romulus and Remus was born. The twin founders were not men but metaphors, two halves of one truth. Romulus represented the outer flame, the world of conquest, ambition, and empire. Remus, the inner flame, wisdom, balance, and the mystery that sustains life. When Romulus killed Remus, it symbolized what Rome would become, a civilization driven by power, yet haunted by the loss of its spiritual twin. Traces of this forgotten brotherhood can still be found in Rome's earliest laws and rituals. Every Roman home had its lararium, a small shrine where a sacred flame burned for the household gods. Every temple carried fire to represent divine presence. Even the Senate, before declaring war or peace, consulted priests who read omens from the movements of smoke. Fire was everywhere, in the forges of the legions, the torches of processions, the hearths of commoners, a constant reminder that Rome's power was born from something divine. But legends say that the Brotherhood of the Fire never truly vanished. As Rome grew into an empire, they adapted. They hid their knowledge in architecture, encoded in geometry, carved into marble, and whispered in the tongues of priests and emperors. Their purpose changed from protecting a flame to protecting an idea, the belief that Rome's destiny was guided not just by might, but by mystery. And perhaps deep beneath the ruins, that fire still burns, unseen, eternal, waiting for someone to remember. Before Rome crowned its first king, there were rulers whose names the Romans swore never to speak again. They called them the Shadow Kings, the forgotten dynasts who ruled the hills around the Tiber long before the time of Romulus. Their legacy was so controversial, so drenched in blood and forbidden knowledge, that later generations erased them from the chronicles, replacing history with myth. Ancient fragments suggest that at least 3 generations of kings reigned before the so-called founding of Rome in 753 before Christ. These were not kings in the political sense we imagine, but sacred monarchs, half priests, half warriors, whose power was both spiritual and absolute. They were chosen not by birth but by omen. A flash of lightning, a sign in the sky, a dream shared by the augurs. That was how a ruler was anointed. Their first law was simple. The city must always serve the gods. Their second was darker. No mortal could rule alone. Each king was bound to a spiritual counterpart, a twin of the soul, who balanced his strength with wisdom. When one died, the other followed. It was said that if the bond was ever broken, the gods themselves would destroy the city that betrayed them. Centuries later, this legend would echo in the tragic rivalry between Romulus and Remus, two souls fated to be one, yet doomed to divide. The last of these shadow kings, according to an obscure Etruscan tablet found near Veii, was known as Velthur of the Seven Flames. He was a ruler, a seer, and perhaps the final initiate of the ancient fire cult. But his reign ended in betrayal. His own twin, his spiritual brother, sought to claim the divine flame for himself. Their conflict, a war fought not for land but for divine favor, consumed the sacred hills and shattered their alliance. The survivors swore never to speak their true history again. Instead, they recast their tragedy as myth, the story of two brothers, one destined to kill the other so that the city might live. When Romulus and Remus appeared in Roman tradition centuries later, their legend fit perfectly into the pattern left by those forgotten kings. Romulus became the embodiment of Velthur's ambition, the builder, the conqueror, the ruler who defied the gods to found his own order. Remus became the betrayed twin, the conscience silenced by power. In this way, the myth did not invent the past. It remembered it, cloaked in metaphor. Perhaps this is why the Romans were obsessed with lineage, omen, and ritual. Deep down, they knew that their empire stood on a sacred wound, a brother's blood spilled to seal the pact between man and destiny. And even in their greatest triumphs, that ancient guilt lingered like a shadow behind every victory parade, every crown of laurel, every whisper of empire. Because Rome was not built on stone alone. It was built on sacrifice, the kind the world was never meant to witness. Every empire begins with a myth, but myths often hide bloodlines. The Romans believed their first king, Romulus, ascended into the heavens after his death and became the god Quirinus. But what if this ascension was not divine at all, but political? What if Romulus didn't die, but disappeared, his identity absorbed by a dynasty that ruled from the shadows for centuries? In the ruins beneath the Forum, archaeologists have uncovered inscriptions too old to belong to any known Roman period. Names etched in an archaic script long before Latin became the language of empire. They mention a lineage of flame-bearers described as custodes urbis aeternus, guardians of the eternal city. Who were they? Not gods, not emperors, but something in between. A secret lineage that claimed to hold the divine right to rule, passed from one generation to the next since the age of the Shadow Kings. According to fragments of early Roman lore, this bloodline did not vanish when Romulus founded the city. It survived, hidden among priests, senators, and augurs. Some even say that the house of the Julii, the family of Julius Caesar himself, traced its ancestry not to Venus, as legend claimed, but to one of these original flame-bearers, a man known as Numitor of the Dawn. The name Numitor appears in the myth as the grandfather of Romulus and Remus, but perhaps that was not coincidence. Perhaps the story preserved a buried truth, that the founders of Rome were descendants of a line far older than history, a dynasty that guided kings, consuls, and emperors alike. This idea terrified the Roman elite. If one family carried divine authority, it could never be challenged. So, across centuries, their existence was erased. Their temples were renamed, their symbols reinterpreted. What remained was only ritual, fragments of truth disguised as religion. The flame of Vesta, the augur's staff, the eagle of Jupiter, each was a relic of that ancient brotherhood hidden in plain sight. And yet their influence persisted. When Augustus rose to power, he revived the Flamines, the old priesthood of the sacred fires. He called himself Princeps, the first among men, echoing the title once used by the keepers of the flame. When he spoke of restoring the Republic, what he truly restored was the myth, the illusion that Rome's destiny was born from divine order. But deep beneath the Palatine Hill, where the foundations of the city were first traced with the sacred plow, legends say that the descendants of the original firekeepers met in secret. They watched as Rome expanded across the world, always ensuring that the flame, symbolic or real, would never die. They didn't need to rule openly. They ruled through continuity, through ritual, through memory. And so the true founders of Rome did not vanish with time. They became the heartbeat of empire, unseen, eternal, and unchallenged. Every myth ends where history begins. And yet, in the case of Rome, the boundary between the two is impossible to draw. The more we uncover, the clearer it becomes. The legend of Romulus and Remus was never meant to tell us who founded Rome, but who should never be forgotten. Across centuries, Rome reinvented herself again and again. From a kingdom to a republic, from a republic to an empire, from empire to ruin, and then to legend. But beneath all those transformations, the same pulse endured. The idea that Rome's destiny was not chosen by mortals, but by something greater. Something older than kings, older than gods. An eternal design. Even in the late empire, emperors like Augustus, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius performed the same ancient rituals, tracing their origins to divine fire, celestial order, and the harmony of the cosmos. They believed, or perhaps feared, that their rule existed only because that original covenant still burned beneath the city. The flame of Vesta, the geometry of the Forum, the axis of the Pantheon aligned with the sun, all of it whispered the same secret. Rome was built to mirror the heavens. Maybe that's why the Romans called their home the Urbs Aeterna, the eternal city. Because deep down, they knew the city itself was a reflection of the divine, a living temple sustained by the hidden founders who had once walked its hills. Even after the empire's fall, the idea of Rome, its law, its architecture, its dream of order, never died. It moved like fire through the centuries, to Byzantium, to the Holy Roman Empire, to the Renaissance, and even to our modern world. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the ancient stones of the Palatine Hill, that first flame still flickers, not of fire but of memory. A reminder that civilizations rise not only through conquest, but through belief, and that the truest power is the one that hides itself behind myth. So the next time you hear the story of Romulus and Remus, two brothers, a wolf, a kingdom born from tragedy, remember this. It was never just a story of men. It was the coded memory of gods, priests, and visionaries who built a city that would outlast them all. Because Rome was not merely founded, it was remembered into being. And if you've made it this far, it means you carry that same curiosity, the spark that once burned in the hearts of Rome's hidden founders. So don't let it fade. If you enjoyed this journey through time, leave a comment telling me what you think might still lie beneath the ruins of Rome. Like this video so more curious minds can discover it. And of course, subscribe to the channel, because there are many more hidden stories waiting to be told. Until next time, may the flame of knowledge never die,